and welcome back to Dark Matter. I'm Avalon,
And I'm Dominique.
and in this episode, we're going to be talking about a series that has created a cultural phenomenon.
Yes, so as everyone knows, this started out as a popular children's book series and was quickly made into a movie series that made millions of dollars. And of course, we were talking about the Harry Potter series. And I think this episode will be really interesting, even if you're not a Harry Potter fan, because we really go into why the series has made such a big impact on society and how it became a household name.
Right, and for everyone listening who has not read the series or watched the movies, Harry Potter follows the adventures and hardships of a boy wizard at the Wizarding School of Hogwarts. It's been acclaimed for its underlying social commentary on issues such as class, race, and the internal conflict between good and evil. The story starts out with 11-year-old Harry finding out that he's a wizard and follows him on a 7-year journey of navigating the world of magic and trying to defeat a powerful dark wizard and his followers.
Yeah, and to me, I have such a big connection to Harry Potter. Like, I even have a tattoo of Harry Potter. I've read the books. I watched the movie series, and it's kind of nostalgic to me because, like I said, I started reading the series when I was in third grade, so I was pretty young. And then when I was younger, like, I would watch the movies and I would make my sister join me and we would build, like, blanket forts and just have movie marathons. So it's very special to me. Like, I have a special connection to it. And we're kind of talking about it because it just really blew up. It was such a big phenomenon. I don't think anyone was really expecting it to be.
Right. Yeah, and for me, my connection to it is a little different. I didn't start like as a kid. I definitely didn't read the books. I still haven't read the books, and I didn't read them growing up. But for me, it was more like of a newer thing. I actually ended up watching all of the movies like one night or night after night. I think because now there's like 8 total movies,
Yeah, 8
right?
total
So it was
movies,
for
yeah.
8 nights. With my family, we just watched like one movie each night, and I was just obsessed after that. Yeah, and like we're gonna get into why we love it so much and why we connect to it, but it's definitely like was like a later experience for me.
Right, yeah. And I think that's a good thing to have because one of us is more into it and knows more details, and the other of us only watched the movie series, which did miss out a lot of details, which makes sense. You know, it's a movie, you can only fit in so many details.
For sure.
And, you know, when I first read the books, like I said, I was pretty young, like third grade, so I actually missed, like, a lot of, like, the deeper meanings, I feel like, a lot of the underlying messages, and it's kind of interesting to go back to it and as an adult and kind of rediscover things you may not have noticed as a kid. Like, recently I actually, started watching this podcast called Potterless Podcast. I really recommend it if you guys are Harry Potter fans. I think it's really funny, and it's about this guy. He's like in his 20s and he's never read the book, so it's basically him reacting to reading the books, and it's pretty funny because it's like sarcastic, but it also has good points. It gave me a different view of the books. I was so ready to be like defensive and be like, no, don't you dare say anything bad about it, but he brings up good points and I'm like, you know what, he has a point there and I'm not even mad about it.
Right.
And you know, I think it's still really relevant to our society because even though it was written in the 90s, it's still very relevant today, you know, what with the racism, acceptance of people who are different. Those are all very like themes that are prevalent in that book, and I feel like it still very much reflects on our current society today.
Yeah, and there's actually an article I found. It was kind of confusing. I think the article was about a book, but we'll link all of that in the description so you guys can check it out for yourself. But it actually describes millennials as the Muggle generation. And in case the followers don't know what like a Muggle is, do you want to explain that really quick?
Yeah, so Muggle is basically just what the wizarding world refers to non-magic people. So like normal people who don't have any idea that the magical world even exists.
Right, and so the article I thought was so interesting. It goes into how millennials are like this different generation and also just how they have connected to Harry Potter because we grew up reading it,
Right.
And watching the movies. And it actually found that I don't know if it was in this article. Again, we'll link everything below. But I'm pretty sure it was in this article, that millennials who, or just people in general, but mostly millennials because we were the generation that like grew up listening to it. Millennials who grew up reading Harry Potter were found to be like more inclusive and like more compassionate and all these different things. So these books really like taught us like kind of values and
They
really
did,
changed
yeah.
the generation. And obviously, I didn't grow up reading them, so it's not like you're not a good person if you didn't read them. But it's just really interesting the cultural impact it's had, like because not many books, like you can't really say that about many books that they've really changed people in that many ways.
That's true, yeah. And it's like not even just people in general. I think like overall, like it definitely impacted our culture. Like, we have amusement parks based off the whole thing, and that's crazy. I feel like that's really the only book series that has managed to find such commercial success. And I feel like, again, it's because it resonates so deeply with people. I feel like they can relate to the characters and the messages that are in the novels and what the people have to go through.
Yeah, because I think that a big like underlying theme of Harry Potter is also just like growing up, like navigating school and life,
Mm-hmm.
and like your own identity, like who you are, and like not fitting in,
Yeah.
and just things that are really relatable, even though like you'd think it's like not that relatable because there's like unicorns and
Right.
ghosts, and it's obviously the whole premise is magic. There's things that like obviously like we don't experience, but it's actually they like the books or at least the movies from because I've only seen movies. It's really relatable in a way, and like you really
Yeah.
grow to love the characters, even with all the like craziness and the magic going on. Like you feel like you know them and you feel like you understand them. Yeah, so I just feel like it's really been able to connect people on a level that not many book series have.
Yeah, and I feel like part of that is because you really get to grow with the characters. Like the movie starts out, Harry's pretty young, he's 11 years old, but as the books continue, he does get older, he grows into a teenager and eventually into a young adult. And it's like, so the reader kind of goes along on this journey with him and you kind of grow with him. And, like the books are classified as children's books, but I would say like there's definitely a turning point in the series where it kind of gets to be darker and you deal with a lot of more grown-up themes, in ways that are still relatable. Like I wouldn't call the last couple books like children's books, honestly. They deal with a lot of heavy stuff, but I feel like that's really important and it was portrayed in a way that kind of really connected with people.
Yeah, for sure. And I could imagine, again, kind of as an outsider, someone who didn't grow up reading them, but for somebody who grew up reading them, like you said, you started reading them in third grade, and so you were probably like around 8 when you started reading those books,
Mm-hmm.
and Harry in the book was like 11. So you could imagine that, like, growing up, like reading
Yeah.
these books about somebody that like you could even relate to is like a similar age to you, and kind of like as you grew up, he's growing up, like you're saying. It's no wonder that they were so like people connected so hard with them,
Yeah.
and really yeah, like it really became like woven into people's personalities, I feel.
I think so too. Yeah, like that's a very big thing. Like, like what's your house? And speaking of which,
Oh
we
yeah.
have to talk about our houses. Of course, we can't do a Harry Potter podcast without, talking about our
Mentioning our
houses.
houses, yep.
Yes, and I am a Ravenclaw.
I am also a Ravenclaw. This is the only reason we're friends. I'm just kidding.
I know, yeah, we're two Ravenclaws, but actually, funny thing, like there's the of course like official test on Pottermore where it tells you your house, and I took that and it did say Ravenclaw, but I've also done the test where I think it was BuzzFeed like collected all the questions you could possibly get, and they gave you like a different percentage of like what you are in all the houses, and apparently I'm very like strong like Ravenclaw, Gryffindor. I'm kind of almost to that Gryffindor point, and I've seen that several times. So it's like I'm mostly Ravenclaw, but like also almost Gryffindor, and then next I'm Hufflepuff, and apparently I'm Lee Slytherin.
Nice.
Yeah,
You're like
so
that's what you hope for.
well, I mean, I didn't really care either way. Like I was really happy
Yeah.
with Ravenclaw and I didn't care what came after, but I was surprised I think by the Gryffindor assessment.
Yeah, me too. And also for our readers or for our listeners who might not really know, or maybe if you've ever heard people talking about their houses and like not known what that means, basically in Harry Potter, each student at Hogwarts, the school that I mentioned earlier, is sorted by a sorting hat. They're sorted into a house, and so it's pretty much you can think of it as like I don't want to say frats, but like because like you are in one. It's not like
Yeah,
you choose
yeah.
to be in one. Like you're in one of four. Like you just are, and it's the Sorting Hat kind of like knows your personality. It's like it's like a person. You gotta watch the movie. If you haven't seen the movies, I highly suggest.
Oh
Please
yeah,
watch them.
my favorite movies ever.
Yeah, but the Sorting Hat like kind of gets a feel for you and decides like these are the people you'd belong with the best. So just like for a quick like synopsis of the houses.
Yeah.
So we're Ravenclaw intellectuals.
Yeah, so that is the house that so the four founders kind of came up with four different houses again to place the students based off their like their values, their personalities,
Right.
stuff like that. So Ravenclaw is the house that values learning and intellect and is known as being wise. And Gryffindor is the more bold house. They really value bravery, you know. I would say they're the sporty people. I feel like they would be the jocks.
They're
in
like
the,
definitely
in
the
school.
popular kids.
Oh yeah, I feel that way
Yeah.
too. And then Hufflepuff, that's the house that kind of accepts everyone. That's the house known as being nice. And I feel like they get shit on a lot, and I feel bad for it.
It's funny. In my notes here, I actually have like something written down for each house. And for Hufflepuff, I have no comment because like I don't know what to say about Hufflepuff. They really do get shit on, and like they're the nice guys.
They really
like,
are.
You need
Yeah.
the Hufflepuffs, but
Yeah.
it's easy to make fun of them too.
It is, yeah, and I feel like they get a bad rep, but I totally love Hufflepuffs. My former roommate is a Hufflepuff, and she's just like the sweetest person ever. So yeah, and they're kind of the house that accepts people who don't belong in any other house. They're very accepting, they're very kind, helpful. Apparently they're good finders. Although apparently that didn't come out of the book, that came out of like some musical or something,
Oh,
which I
really?
did learn. Yeah, it's very interesting. And then of course Slytherin, which is known as well, they're kind of known for like being the bad guy house. And again, I
Yeah.
feel like that's very very bad sounding for them, but it just means, you know, they're very ambitious. They're willing to do whatever it takes to get what they want, you know, which could be a good thing and a bad thing.
Yeah, like again, you need the Slytherins.
Yeah,
to
yeah,
get,
you do.
Like to get shit done, like you do need the Slytherins. They're not all bad, but because of their tendencies to be cutthroat and to be just like I'm just gonna make this happen, they do tend to be, I feel like, evil more often.
Yes.
Whereas like Hufflepuffs, like their whole thing is just trying to help people out and like include people.
Right.
So I can't think of any bad Hufflepuffs. Whereas Slytherins, I actually like when we were talking about Harry Potter initially, like I kind of had a realization that like Slytherin is basically a frat. Like every bad, like I wrote down like Slytherin's a frat. Prove me wrong. Like I know there's like females in Slytherin too, but like
Yeah.
the characters we all think of as Slytherin are males, and I feel like anything you can think of as like a bad stereotype about frats, which again they're not all true, but any bad stereotype you can think about like with frats could pretty much be true of Slytherin.
That's very
So
true.
that's how you could think of Slytherins. They each have an animal as well. So Slytherin is a snake. They're
Yes.
like snakes in the grass. Like that's just who they are.
Very on the head.
Yeah, exactly.
And then Hufflepuffs are badgers.
I was
Apparently.
gonna say, were
yeah.
they badgers? Like
They
I
were
don't know. I'm like
badgers.
badgers, dude. Like okay, that's fine.
That's
like,
a very Hufflepuff animal.
Yeah, it really is.
And then Ravenclaws are actually the symbol for our animal is a raven. However, in the movies, I think it was changed to a crow. I don't know why.
Ravens are cooler. That's
Yeah,
like, not
ravens
okay.
are cooler too. I agree with that. I am mad that they changed it. They also changed our colors for the movie too. Apparently,
What were the colors in the movie? I didn't even notice.
I think I'm not sure. I'm kind of mixed up which is the book and which is the movie, but I know what I think it's supposed to be bronze and blue, and in the movie they changed it to like silver and blue or something. Not a big deal, but I just wanted to
I
mention
was like,
that
is
too.
it not blue? I was like, I have a Ravenclaw scarf at home that's blue.
I know you would have
Should
been
I
so
throw it
upset,
out?
right?
Yeah.
But yeah, and then of course, Gryffindors are lions because you know what examples bravery more, yeah.
Oh, and by the way, all of them, I would say the main characters,
They're
like,
all from
yeah,
Gryffindor.
all
There's
Harry Potter and then his two companions that are like really the main characters. They're all in Gryffindor.
Yeah,
so those are like the cool kids.
yeah, everyone wants to be in Gryffindor because that's where all the cool kids are, you know, which is a little biased, you know.
It is a bit biased. I know, because I feel like I never wanted to be Gryffindor, because that's just like how we are. We're like, oh,
Yeah, I don't wanna
we
be
don't
part
hang
of
out with
that
those
cool
people.
kid.
Yeah, exactly.
But yeah, and speaking of the Golden Trio, you know, let's talk about the different characters.
Yeah.
So first of all, of course, we have Harry Potter, who's the main character, like you said. He's a very angsty boy sometimes, especially
He is.
later on in the books and movies. You know, like he gets to be a teenager, which is normal. You know, again, as a teenager, you tend to be very angsty. Everything is like the end of the world. Which, to be fair for Harry, I think that makes sense
He
because
is dealing with the end of the world.
He is.
So
He
like
really is.
at some points he is. So like it kind of you like sympathize with that.
Yeah, and I feel like one of the criticisms I've heard of Harry is that he tends to be very self-centered in a way that he focuses on his own problems, and I would agree with that, but again, like, the poor boy is dealing with a lot of stuff. You know, he was orphaned at a young age. Like, his parents were murdered by this dark wizard whose name is Voldemort, or he who must not be named for people who are afraid to say it. But yeah, you know, he does deal with a lot of stuff. He's had a hard life. His parents were brutally murdered when he was a baby. He lived with his abusive aunt and uncle for 11 years of his life.
His shitty cousin.
Yeah, and his shitty, spoiled cousin.
Yeah, not making it easier on him.
Yeah, and, you know, he really is dealing with a lot. He's thrust into this world that he knew nothing about. He's known as special, like, everyone accepts or like expects great things from him, and then he is expected to fight off this dark wizard. So a lot of pressure on him. I don't blame him if he's self-centered at all. I totally get it.
Yeah, and something if we have any Lord of the Rings fans listening, I think you could probably like draw some comparisons between Frodo Baggins and Harry Potter. They're not exactly the same, but I feel like there's some similarities in the way that like Frodo has to carry this heavy burden of like taking the ring to Mordor to destroy it, and Harry also has this heavy burden of which he didn't choose. It was bestowed upon him.
Right.
He has this heavy burden of like being the chosen one and having to defeat this dark wizard. Where some days he's just like, I don't want to do this.
Yeah, he's like, I just want to be a regular old kid. I want to hang out with my friends.
Right.
Poor guy, he really doesn't get a chance to ever do that.
Yeah, and I think they both have this kind of like unmitigated power. With Frodo, it's the ring, and with Harry, it's just being such a powerful wizard. And they both struggle with the pull and the kind of the ebb and flow of like good and evil. Like they're good inside, but all of this power can kind of overcome them sometimes, and you can see them kind of slipping in and out of like, who am I? Who should I be? Who do I belong with? Right. So that's just for people who like Lord of the Rings, maybe don't know as much about Harry Potter. I think that's like a comparison that I've drawn before.
Yes, and we should have said this before, but spoiler alert, if you haven't read the movies, we will definitely be going into like more details of what happens.
At this point, though, if you haven't read the books or seen the movies,
what are you doing?
You just watch the movies. Okay, yeah. Just get on that.
It is, and like of course the female in the Golden Trio is Hermione, and honestly, Ron and Harry would have died in the very first year without her. Like, they would have died in the first book, like, 1,000 times over. They don't know what they're doing. If it weren't for Hermione, like, they would be in so much trouble.
That is so true. I feel like the character I relate to the most is definitely Hermione, because she's such a worrywart, but also she's, like, so academically driven, and she's very, like, nobody's gonna get in my way. I'm gonna, like, do what I have to do. But, like, she doesn't want anything selfish. She just, like, you know what I mean? She's just a really hard worker.
Right.
She can definitely be annoying at times.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Like, if I had to say one character, there's, like, one character I related to, I would definitely say it was Hermione.
Yeah, and a big thing with Hermione and Ron and Harry is this love triangle, which really didn't ever exist, but people...
in the movies, not at all.
Yeah, but people kind of have this argument of whether Hermione and Ron should have ended up together, or whether she should have ended up with Harry, and J.K. Rowling, too, like, years after, actually admitted that she wished she had put Harry and Hermione together, and some people agree with that, but I don't. Like, I feel like if you only saw the movies, I feel like you would agree with that somewhat, like, if she should have ended up with Harry, because you don't get to see that many small scenes with her and Ron. You only get to see her and Harry interact, and in the books, I feel like there's so much more detail, and you can truly understand why. You know, like, she and Harry definitely love each other, but they also get on each other's nerves, like, so much, and her and Ron are just, like, they, like, kind of fight and tease each other and get on each other's nerves, but you can tell it's, like, in a loving way. Like, he's always been super protective of her, and I just think they're a really good match. I don't see Harry and Hermione being together. I feel like Harry, again, can sometimes be self-centered, and he can kind of not understand Hermione sometimes, you know, because she is so academically driven and Harry's not. They kind of, their personalities I feel like just clash. So for me, I really feel like she should have ended up with Ron. That's just my take on the situation. I'm sure others will have their own opinion.
Yeah, I think that when you told me this whole thing, like in the books, that was kind of missed in the movies, I was like, what? Like, I didn't see her with Harry at all. Like, I never
Yeah.
even thought of that as like a possibility. Honestly, it always made sense for me, for her to be with Harry or to be with Ron
Ron,
from
yeah.
where I was standing. But yeah, like we'll get into that later. That there's a lot of differences between the books and the movies.
Yeah.
Again, I haven't read them, but you'll comment on that more later. But yeah, I think that's it's funny when you started telling me about that. Like from your perspective, I was like, yeah, that makes way more sense.
Yeah, and so moving on to Ron, I feel like he also gets a lot of flack for being just like a sidekick or like the comedic relief friend, and he's kind of just in Harry's shadow. And I feel like he gets a lot of crap for that. Again, in the movies, I really don't like the way they portrayed him. I think Rupert Grant did a great job portraying Ron, but he was kind of, again, like placed as like a comedic relief character and nothing more than that. They didn't
Right.
really go deeper into his character, like why he is the way he is, how he feels being the youngest of like seven brothers, like that does take a toll on you because you feel like you're stuck behind their shadow and you kind of can't develop your own personality. And in the books, he was so much funnier. He's very sarcastic and witty, and he's such a loyal friend to Harry. Like that's one of the biggest things about him. He's such a loyal friend, and he will do whatever it takes to keep Harry and Hermione safe. And then I feel like that was just taken away from him in the
Yeah,
movies.
he's
He was
kind of a
very
bum in the movies, to be honest.
he
Or
is. He's
like,
very one dimensional.
yeah, he's kind of just like, I don't know, I'm just here. Like
Yeah.
from the first time you see him on the train, where he's like just like vegging out on all
Yeah.
the chocolates because like
Which
Harry
same.
buys them. Yeah, but then I feel like that personality never changes. Like he's
That's
just
true.
kind of like, I'm just here, like whatever, like I don't really care.
Yeah,
And like
exactly.
I didn't see him as, because the way you're describing him, going back to Lord of the Rings, because I'm a huge Lord of the Rings person, that's more like Samwise Gamgee, like Frodo's like ride or die, his guy who's always there for him, like he's like the best friend you could imagine. But like Ron, like he's just kind of there. You know what I mean? Like it's not that he's a bad friend, but he doesn't like really strike me as like an amazing friend who's like you're gonna go to with all your issues. He's just kind of like there.
Yeah, and he does have his own problems, of course. Like, again, he feels sometimes that he is kind of hidden in Harry's shadow, and that makes sense because everyone does kind of like immediately gravitate towards Harry because he's the chosen one. He's the boy who lived. And that can be a heavy burden to carry, for Harry and for Ron as well, being his friend. That's kind of all he's known for is being Harry's sidekick.
Right.
And moving on to characters who were not done justice in the movie. Oh my god, let's talk about Ginny Weasley. I'm so sad because I love Ginny Weasley in the books. Like, Mike Schubert said this in Potterless podcast, is book 6 should have been named Harry Potter and the Rise of Ginny Weasley, and I 100% agree. The movies, it was so awkward because I feel like the romance between her and Harry was so unbelievable.
Like non-existent. 'Cause
Non-existent.
I remember
There's
at the
no
end,
chemistry.
they're like it shows they're together, and I remember genuinely being like, huh? Like, oh, I guess he just like married some random person that like he happened to know. Like there was literally like I don't know how many times they talked throughout all of the movies,
Yeah.
but you could count it on your hands. Like I was totally like confused when I saw they were together.
Exactly, yeah. And I was very upset about this because in the books she's kind of like Fred and George. She's very mischievous, she's very sarcastic. She has the greatest comebacks to Harry, especially when he's being his like angsty little self. She has the greatest comeback. She is a troublemaker and she knows who she is. She's a very confident girl. I love that about her. And in the movie, she's kind of just there again.
Yeah.
It seems like she ended up with Harry only because it's
'Cause
like,
they were
oh, Ron
there.
and
Yeah.
like she's just there, and Ron and Hermione got together, so Harry has to marry into the Weasley family, which I feel like is so sad. Like I love Ginny Weasley. I will stand by that for the rest of my life.
Yeah, I was shocked when you told me all that about Ginny Weasley because I was like really? Like she's literally just a character that's like in the shadows. Like she has zero personality. Not that like she's like they just don't give her any airtime, honestly. Like
Yeah.
they just they didn't develop her personality. So I knew nothing about her until you mentioned it to me and I was like, what the hell? Like why didn't they reflect that in the movies?
Yeah, and like I said, I think that has to do with movies can only be so long, and I really wish that they had made it into a TV series. Don't get me wrong, I actually love the movies. They're still my favorite movies, despite the fact that a lot of people have problems with them, again, because of like changes from books to movie as well as character portrayals. I agree with all that. I realize that there is a big change and that the movies could have been way better, but I still deeply love them. Again, I'm very attached to them because I grew up watching them, and it's really enjoyable for me to watch it. But I do agree that it could have been done way better if it was a movie series, because then you would be able to have the time and go into the detail of these characters and really flesh them out, you know?
Yeah, for sure.
But yeah, so hopefully they will one day, you do a Harry Potter remake where it's a TV series. I would definitely watch it. I'm sure a bunch of other people would too.
Yeah, for sure. And one character that I know when we were talking about, like, okay, so let's talk about some characters that, stuck out to us or, like, that are important. I think the one that always came to my mind was Draco Malfoy.
Yeah, me too.
Am I saying his last name right?
Yes, Malfoy.
Okay, there's so many names that I'm like, I don't even know. Even J.K. Rowling or Rowling, I don't even know how to... So there's probably going to be mispronunciations on my part. Sorry. I don't know what else to tell you. But Draco, I think, is such an interesting character. He is a part of Slytherin, like we were mentioning earlier, the frat, basically. And he kind of, like, he's kind of like a dichotomous character, because in one way, he really does represent that, like, again, this is a stereotype, but, like, the frat boy or, like, the rich, like, the kind bully. Of white, privileged young man who just can get away with absolutely anything. Yeah, he's a bully. He's so mean for no reason. He's mischievous, but not in a fun way, like, just in a bully way, like, to do something to hurt someone else. Like, that's just how he is.
And he is right away kind of pinned as Harry's rival, because in both the books and movies, he comes from this very powerful pureblood family, which basically means, like, your family has been made up for wizards for, like, several generations, and that's the highest status you can be as a pureblood. So he's kind of raised with very like racist, racist views. He looks down on Muggle-born wizards, calls them mudbloods, which is basically the equivalent of a racial slur, So
it is a racial slur in the movies, yeah, for sure. Yeah, because I think that's totally like what you're saying, with that he was born from, like, a pure blood family. That's definitely the equivalent of, like, I would say, like, a white supremacy. Like, that's kind of like his parent, like, his dad's, like, mentality. That's where he comes from. And that kind of brings me into the other side of him, which is, like, yes, he's, like, the embodiment of evil and everything that we don't like in a person, but he's also a victim of his circumstance. Because if you think about it, like, he is wicked. He does do awful things, and he hangs out with awful people. But, like, how much is his fault and how much is due to his circumstance? Because if you were born into this evil family, like, you never really had a chance. You know what I mean? And, like,
because you don't know any different. This is what you grew up with. These are what the adults who you look up to are telling you, and of course that's what you're going to believe, because that's all you know.
Especially when you're a kid, you just believe whatever your parents say. Exactly. And, like, of course it doesn't excuse his behavior.
No, not at all.
But then at some points in the movie, you kind of see him as more of, like, a vulnerable kid, where, like, he's like the bully, he never wants to be seen as a kid. He never wants to be seen as vulnerable. But you'll see moments where he struggles with his identity, and he, like, you kind of realize that, like, maybe he's not, like, evil. He was born into this evil family, and he doesn't really want to be that way. So again, kind of going back to the struggle between good and bad, like the internal conflict that Harry experiences, kind of on the flip side with Draco, it's like instead of Harry's, like, mostly good, but sometimes has those bad urges. Kind of on the flip side, like, Draco's mostly bad. Nobody, like, thinks of him as, like, a good guy or, like, an upstanding student.
Yeah, no one can say that Draco Malfoy is a good person.
Yeah, for sure. But there's definitely glimpses of good in him, and you kind of see, like you watch the movie and you just hate this guy. You dislike him so much. But then sometimes you kind of stop and think about, like, oh, like, he did come from this horrible family. Yeah. And, like, how much is that? I mean, that's just not his fault.
Right, and I feel like it's easy to just point him out right away and say, like, oh, he's such a bad guy, like, awful things deserve to happen to him. But, going back into, like, we'll talk about this more, but Snape, so many people are quick to forgive him at the end of the book. Like, he was this horrible bully. He was a professor, and he's mean to so many students, not just Harry, but so many other students.
Yeah, children,
And,
by the way.
yeah.
Like, he's basically, like, it gets to a point where it's, like, kind of child abuse. Like, he
Yeah.
hasn't, like, hit them that really, but, like, he's
But I say
really,
he, like,
really...
like, mentally and emotionally
Yeah,
kind of
he-
traumatizes them
yes,
a little bit.
for sure.
And so people are so quick to say at the end of the book, like, oh, he was a good guy, he did good things, like, everything's forgiven. But no, let's not forget, he did all those terrible things. And
Right.
I feel like that's kind of the flip side of Draco. It's like, here's this kid, like, yes, he's done terrible things, but again, don't remember, like, don't forget, like, how much is he to blame? Like, his father kind of led him into this life, and you see a little bit more in the later books and movies. Like, he kind of does start to question some of this stuff. Like, I don't think he fully believes in what his father believes in. Like, he is a little hesitant to join the Death Eaters, which is Voldemort's followers, because I think deep down he really doesn't believe that. And again, not saying he's a good person, because
Of course,
I don't
you can't
think
discount
that. Yeah.
all of the bad things he did.
No, for sure.
But
He's definitely
it just
a
makes
bully.
you think, and I think he's kind of comparable, like, in real life. I like thinking of the characters of, like, who would they be in real life.
Right.
He kind of reminds me of someone who escaped some kind of, like, evil cult,
Mhm.
like a torturous, like, some kind of cult that, like, was just pure evil, right?
Right.
Like, because there's, like, lots of, like, different religious groups that, like, they're not hurting anybody. But I'm talking about the kinds that are, like Marilyn, or not Marilyn Manson, he's a musician. I like his music.
Charles Manson.
Charles Manson, like, he's kind of cool, I'm talking.
Yes.
And, you know, there's people who are born into cults like that.
Yeah. And
then
it's hard to break
it's
from
hard
that
to break
mindset.
away, because your whole
Yeah.
family's there, and you have to break away from your family.
Yes.
And as far as I remember for Draco, he does eventually break away, right?
Yeah, or at least maybe not physically, like, completely break away, but he hesitates. Like, in the 6th book, he has to identify Hermione so that they can take Harry and them to Voldemort, and he doesn't do that. So
Right.
he willingly disobeyed, like, his family's orders, Voldemort's orders, and I think that is a sign as to him kind of starting to question or not agree with the stuff that he was told as he grew up, you know? And I'm a little disappointed that JK kind of, like, didn't develop that a little bit
'cause
more.
for me, that was so interesting. I wish
Yes.
there was more of, like, a resolution. I wish there was more attention paid to that, because
Right.
he's definitely, like I said, the equivalent of, like, a cult survivor, or kind of, like, just coming from a very racist, backwards family.
Yes.
And he's able to, like, because I say racist, I'm putting up air quotes, you can't see them.
Right.
But because, like, obviously most of the people he's racist towards are also white, so I can't really say it's racist, but, like, it's basically racism, but because for them it's like magic, either you're mudblood or you're pure blood, and I feel like that was, like, J.K. Rowling's way of, like, interpreting race. You know, even if
Yes,
she
I
didn't
think
mean
so
to
too.
interpret it that way, I feel like it's easy you can interpret it that way. So yeah, he does all these evil things, but yeah, it's just really interesting that at the end of the day, it's like he didn't really succumb to the evil, and I wish there was more attention paid to that, because I think that's, like, a very interesting story right there.
Right, I think so too. Because again, he was a kid, and you kind of see him start to follow his own path, you know, as opposed to Snape, like, leading into that. He was a fully cognizant adult. Like, he knew what he was doing.
Yeah, he was not a child.
No, he was not a child, definitely. And, you know, that kind of leads into the Snape-James Potter dynamic. If you don't know the story, James Potter is Harry's father, and he kind of bullied Snape when he was younger, when they were in school together.
And then he married Snape's crush.
Yes, James Potter
to rub it in
married
his
Lily
face.
Evans, who Snape was in love with,
Right.
and he kind of just never got over that. But the thing is,
No, he
like,
absolutely never got
No, he
over it.
never
And then
did
he
that.
took it out on this child of Lily. What, that was her name, right? Lily.
yes,
I
Lily
always forget
Evans.
her name.
Yeah.
He takes it out on Harry Potter, a child, and he makes this poor kid's life hell. And yeah, like you said, like, people are quick to forgive him, but, like, there's no excuse for that.
Yeah,
like,
no,
sorry, there's
yeah.
no excuse for that behavior.
Like, that was a defenseless kid. Like, you claim to love his mother, but so then why are you being so cruel to her child, you know?
He's selfish. He's like, oh my god, you know what he's like? He's like the nice guy. That he's like, oh, I just want to, like, take care of you and be nice to you. And you're like, oh, I'm not really interested in a relationship. And he's like, okay, bitch. You know what I'm talking about?
He
Like, that's
kinda
him.
is.
Like, he just wanted to be with her. He's selfish. It's not that he really, like, or I'm sure he loved her, but like he's
I
just selfish.
I wouldn't even really call it. I mean, maybe he
Maybe
does love her, but
obsession,
I
or
think
like
yeah, he's
it does
mostly
become an obsession.
obsessed.
Yeah.
Yeah, and again, like he never got over his childhood crush. He kind of like let it make him bitter, and
Oh, yeah.
there's a huge argument among like Potter fans about like who's the bad guy, who's the good guy between James Potter and Snape, and it's like neither of them would be the good guys to me. Like both and neither, because I understand totally like James Potter was a bully. Like again, I don't think that's ever okay. But
he was like
did
a jock bully. Like
he was
in
a,
the more
yes.
traditional sense of a bully.
But that was when he was, in his younger teenage years, like in the books, he did end up saving Snape's life.
Right.
He got better, and I feel like he just grew up and he kind of got over that, which is kind of the opposite of what Snape did, like he kind of held on to that resentment and that hate, and he really let it fester and make him bitter. And he was a major dick, not only to Harry, but like to Hermione, and he bullied Neville to the point of like he was Neville's biggest fear, and I think that's never okay.
A lot of kids feared him, like they were scared of him, and I think that's something again that's like a lot of kids could relate to, like that one teacher that's scary. But I think that it is overlooked a lot that Snape was like he's I feel like worse than James Potter in that like James was a bully to people his age, which is not okay, and there's no
Bullying's
excuse for it. But it's more, I guess, just more common. But still, there's no excuse for it. Like he was a dick. We can't deny that. But Snape was a bully to children.
Yeah, to little children who did nothing to him.
Come on, you guys, that's not okay. We can't excuse that. So I think that is a very interesting aspect, that it's like which one's the bad guy, which one's the good guy. Well, this story just goes to show you that like
there is no good guy. There's no bad
life
guy.
Is not that black and white. Just like with Draco, it's like yes, he's bad, but he comes from these circumstances.
Yeah.
And like yes, Harry's good, but he also does some things that he shouldn't have. You know what I mean? So it's like it really gets at this concept of like nobody's perfectly good, nobody's perfectly bad.
Oh yeah.
There's so much gray area, and it really gets at like the human experience, I feel.
It really does. Again, I think that's why these books are so relatable. It doesn't place them as like black and white. It's a very gray world,
Exactly.
And speaking of gray areas and moral dilemmas,
nice segue.
Yes, thank you. Let's talk about Dumbledore, because he, I feel like, has become a very controversial character lately.
Because, for many reasons.
Yes, for many reasons. He was seen kind of as Harry's father figure throughout most of the book. He was the one that Harry really confided in and trusted. And then you learn at the end of the book that he knew that Harry had to die in the end to be able to stop Voldemort. And I feel like a lot of people really kind of just turned quickly and like went from being, oh my gosh, Dumbledore is the greatest guy, to Dumbledore's a bad guy. And I kind of don't agree with that. Like, was he actually a bad guy? And that brings up so many like morality questions to me, like does the end justify the means, and like the one versus the many? Because playing devil's advocate here, like I actually don't think Dumbledore's a bad guy, because yes, he knew that Harry would have to end up sacrificing himself, but that goes into a bunch of ethical questions of like, what are you willing to sacrifice to get to the end? It is like one child versus the many that he wants to stop Voldemort from killing, And I don't think that this was either the right decision or a good decision, but I think it was what he had to do at the time. He just had to make a difficult decision, and there was no good answer.
Yeah, because at the end of the day, like, nobody should have to be put in that in that situation where they have to decide between one or many. But think about like the alternative, guys. Like, think about if he was like, yeah, you know what? I really like this Harry guy. Like, screw everyone else. Screw like the world as we know it. Like, I'll just let Voldemort run free.
Right.
Like, that's like, to me, that seems objectively worse, because he's sacrificing many people. And like, it was kind of like he was leading Harry on.
Yeah,
but there was no other way. He couldn't have done it in any other way, really.
Yeah, I feel like a lot of people argue that he was grooming Harry, to die. And I feel and I feel like that's not really the thing. Like, I feel like he genuinely cared for Harry, I feel like he tried to take care of him as best as he could, but in the end he was like, this is what has to happen, and unfortunately, like, it's not a good decision, it's not a good play or like a good situation for anyone, and it's not fair to have to ask a young child, like he's 17 at the time, to sacrifice your life for everything. But I feel like Harry understands it, you know, he understands the gravity of what's happening right now. Like, his entire life, again, has been affected by this since he was a child. His parents died because of this wizard, like, his friends and other family have died because of this wizard, and he knows that he has to stop it.
Right. Yeah, I think it's really interesting that you can. I mean, that people see it as like you're saying, grooming, but I feel like you can kind of see it as like Dumbledore knew his years were limited, and so he was trying to maybe kind of like be a mentor and make those years the best that he could and prepare him to understand, instead of just being like, you have to die for everyone, like, in preparing him so that Harry could make that conclusion for himself and realize that
That's
like,
true.
oh, this is what has to happen. So I don't really think Dumbledore is a bad guy. Again, like, I'm on the same side as you, because again, just thinking about the alternative, would it really be better to let everyone else die?
Right.
I don't think so.
Yeah, and again, I don't know the answer to this question, like whether, if he's a bad guy, is he a good guy? And I think that's the thing, is like, no one's entirely bad, no one's entirely good. I feel like at his core, Dumbledore's a good guy. Did he make mistakes? Yeah, absolutely. And, you know, again, that's never an easy decision to make. Like, no one would ever want to make that decision. And, you know, again, like, thinking of the ethical question, like, some questions I've had posed to me in sociology classes before is, like, you know, that question is, like, if there was a burning building and you can save one person or 100 people, who would you save? Naturally, you would say, you know, 100 people, because that makes more sense, and I feel like that kind of ties into Dumbledore's decision-making. But on the flip side, the question changes to, you could save one person or 100 people, but that one person is your mother, you know?
Of course, yeah.
And again, that
That's
ethical
like the
dilemma.
dilemma of, like,
Yes.
well,
What's right, what's
people
wrong.
now?
Yeah.
Like, I want to save my mom.
Exactly, yeah, it's easy to say, again, like, of course 100 people, that's who I'd save without having any emotional connection to it, and suddenly it being someone that you love and that you care for, you know? So again, like, I would not want to make that decision, and Dumbledore had to make that decision, so I think that's something definitely to consider.
Yeah, again, it's not like he wanted to do this.
No.
It's not like something he chose. Like, he had to make this decision, and I think he was just doing it, like, he was putting the needs of the many ahead of the needs of the one, and I commend that. And so I mean, I agree. Of course, he did make mistakes, who doesn't? But the way I see it is, like, yeah, he did the right thing objectively. That's just, like, my opinion of it.
Me too. And then, so moving on from the books versus the movies, you know, there definitely were some scenes changed in the movies, like, Charlie Weasley was never introduced in the films, like, ever really. You see, like, one picture of him and that's it. You don't learn about Ted Tonks, which is Remus.
That sounds like Ted Talks.
Thank
you for listening
Ted
to my
Tonks.
TED Talks.
Yeah. So he's the child of Nymphadora and Remus, and, you know, he kind of was just, like, if you saw the movies, you would never even know about him, you know, you'd never know that he kind of became an orphan like Harry, because unfortunately, spoiler alert, both his parents died in the last Wizarding War. And you wouldn't know that Harry is his godfather or anything like that, you know? So I feel like, again, you miss out on a little bit of that, and they don't really show Remus and Tonks' relationships in the movie either. One really big thing they changed was, like, a completely different scene that was never even in the books is the burrow, the Weasleys' home gets burnt down in book 6, and it was kind of like, what was the point of that? That was, like, never in the movies. I feel like it was to be dramatic and add action to the movies.
Wait, that wasn't in the books?
No, it was never in the books. I don't know where it came from.
Yeah, it kind of, now that I think of it, it didn't really serve a purpose. There's so much that I was just like, okay.
Yeah,
and
I bet.
Like, you mentioned to me, and you're like, no, that's not supposed to happen. And I'm like, oh, yeah, that is weird. I don't know why that happened.
Yeah, like, was there ever a time in the movies where you were confused and you didn't know what was happening?
Many times. But I think that, like, I don't know if I can recall any now, but I think, like, what you're mentioning about, like, Charlie Weasley, like, I didn't know he even existed.
Right, you're probably like, who is this?
Yeah, it's mostly things that I'm like, well, like we mentioned with Ginny Weasley, that was definitely, like, a confusion of mine.
Yes.
I think with Ron and Hermione, I don't know, I guess there wasn't enough attention paid to that as well, so I was kind of, like, confused when they were, like, suddenly together. There was, like,
it
several
seemed to
things
come
that
out
I'm
of
like,
nowhere, yeah.
Several things were kind of, like, like clumsily like put in that I was like, what's going on?
Right, yeah. So again, like we mentioned, the Ginny like under portrayal, under representation, and something also to mention is that some of Ron's lines that were in the books were given to Hermione in the movies, and I feel like that was to make her look more like the smart girl, really to emphasize that part in her character. And I feel like that was unfair to Ron because again, like he is quiet smart, he is quiet creative.
He's not shown that way though. Yeah,
Yeah, he's
I
never
had
shown
no
that
idea
way.
because in the movies he was really shown as, like you said, kind of a bum. Like he doesn't really know much. Like he's a nice guy, but like
He's just
he doesn't
there.
know what's going on.
Yeah.
Yeah, he's just there.
Like
Yeah,
he's the
and
funny idiot, like which isn't fair to
yeah.
him.
Yes, I think that like from what you've told me, the characters are a little more balanced in the books.
Yes,
Because
they
in the
are.
movies, like everyone's a little bit more cut and dry. Like I think Hermione's like she's very like hardworking, very studious, and she doesn't. It's not like she doesn't get people's emotions. She's just like not really hung up on that. She's like, yeah, I don't really care. Like I'm just gonna like do my own thing. Like I'm gonna get this done, and like I don't really care how you feel about it.
Right, like she's a little awkward with like
She
society
can
and
be
everyone.
awkward, yeah. Whereas with Ron, he's just like very, like I said, just kind of there. And I think that from what you're saying, like they were a little bit more balanced in the books. They weren't so they weren't like put into boxes, especially those two characters. Because again, we talked about before that nobody can really be put in a box. But I think with those two characters, they kind of were.
Yeah, that's the thing. It's like again, like with so much detail to put into the movies that have been transferred from the books, I feel like you can only do so much for the background character. And they're not even background characters, they're one of the main characters, but again, like there's so many things that need to be told for this story that the finer details kind of fall to the wayside.
Right.
And one thing too is that I've heard a lot of people complain about is that I also agree with is that I kind of wish that the actors who played Harry Potter's parents, along with others from the generation, were younger looking because I don't know if you know this, but in the books, James and Lily were actually pretty young. They were only 21 when they died. So that's
Again,
younger
I had
than
no
we
idea
are.
because they were in the movie. They were like
They look like in their 30s, 40s, you know?
well, they look like 30s to me. Yeah, they
Yeah.
look like just a normal couple, like probably in their 30s. But like, yeah, I honestly didn't know that till right now that they were 21 because that kind of changes things.
Right? Like
and,
you realize like I feel like it lessens the impact when you see that they're older because like in the books it's much more tragic. Like they just left school, they just had their baby boy. They're so young and just starting to live their life and it was tragically cut short because of this dark wizard and I feel like that gets a little lost if you see these actors who look like they've had like a full life that they've got to do a lot of things that they wanted to but no like they were very young like they're younger than we are right now and you know it's just adds an extra layer of tragedy to it because they are so young and they didn't get to live their life, they didn't get to raise their son together.
Right. And was there something I see here about like the movie complaints, like actual complaints about the movie from fans as far as like representation goes?
Yeah, well, a lot of people have noticed, and one website even stated that out of the 1,207 minutes of the entire movie series, only 5 minutes and 40 seconds of dialogue are said by characters of color. So every other character in this movie is white. Yeah. So the representation was not great in this movie series. I feel like that's something we have to talk about.
Yeah, and I think that that's kind of I don't mean to excuse it, but I think that like inclusion has become more like paid attention to now.
I think so too. Yes.
I think if we looked back at like other movies that came out at the same time as Harry Potter, there would probably unfortunately be a similar equivalent.
Yeah, to be fair,
or a similar amount of dialogue for people of color. Yeah, so.
And I think like inclusion and stuff weren't really topics that they were overly worried about in that time. When it was like the early 2000s.
It at all. Yeah, like inclusion is so important, and people shouldn't just like jump on the bandwagon like, oh, we're gonna include people now. But I think that is something to consider. That like, well, if you're calling this series out, you have to call out pretty much every other series ever.
Right. Yeah. Like we just like for a series that is so worried about like inclusion into the world and like understanding other people, it is surprisingly lacking in representation.
Yeah, for sure.
And the thing is like if you do have representation, you have to do it well. Like you can't just have it be like a character
like you're checking a box.
Yeah, exactly. Like you have to portray that character well, you know?
I think that's something we've talked a lot about, and something we actually hope to do a future episode on, just
Yes.
representation itself, is that a lot of times something that bothers me is that the representation, like when they're trying to be inclusive, it comes off as like, check the box, we have a black person, check the box, we have the token Asian, and they tokenize them, you know, they make them like this one-dimensional character that it's just like the purpose they're there. It's not like they're there to serve a purpose in the story. They're there to be black or to be Asian or to be Hispanic, just so that they have that character.
Exactly, and that's something that you have to do carefully. I think, like, if you do representation, you have to do it well. You have to realize that these are people who have complex emotions and feelings and backgrounds. They can't just be there for, like, oh, well, there's our one black person. You know, the movie's complete.
Like, check the box. Yeah, and I think that there's a lot of, like, oh, like, we included the Muslim girl, and she hates wearing hijab, and her family's so oppressive, and it's, like, I'm, like, just coming from, like, everyone I know, like, I think that's a stereotype that I've seen a lot, and I'm like, no Muslim women I know are like that.
Right, yeah.
And so I think that just, like, in general, I wish that there was more movies that, like, thoughtfully approached inclusivity rather than just haphazardly being like, I don't know what it's like to be Muslim, or I don't know what it's like to be black, I guess it's like this, just throw the character in there. And it's like, well, that served no purpose. It actually hurt you more than it helped.
And, you know, talking about representation, that kind of leads into J.K. Rowling, you know, like, recently she has been a little problematic. Again, you know, like, POC representation in the movies, as well as retroactively trying to change the story, like, i.e. gay Dumbledore, you know, like, a couple years ago.
Outing characters after the fact. Yes. After the movies are long since been released. Like, they've already been out. There's no reason, or the movies have been out. There's no reason for all of a sudden the character to have been gay.
I know, like,
it doesn't even change the story.
Yeah, like, it kind of just came out of nowhere. I feel like, again, she was just trying to check that box and say, oh yeah, look, like, there's a gay character in this movie. We're diverse.
Right, and that, again, just serves to hurt more than help, because it's like,
I agree.
Because the point is, to me, it's like, okay, so Dumbledore's gay. What does that change? And so, like, if you wanted him to be gay, why didn't you make that a significant part of the plot? Or at least make it so that it's noticeable. Not just go back after the fact and try to piece it together. Like, like, oh, yeah, he was gay. Like, I swear. Like, you could say anything then. You could say that they all were, like, this, like, Hogwarts was in the sky. And they were all flying to school. Like, you know what I mean? Like, you could go back and say anything you wanted. Like, why didn't you include it in it if it meant so much to you for there to be LGBT characters? Maybe you should have, like, thoughtfully included that, rather than going back and, like I said, like, haphazardly trying to piece something together. Like, that just seems super forced and artificial, and it's I just don't think it's helpful. I think it's again, I think it's harmful more than it's helpful. I think it would have meant so much more if, instead of trying to be like, by the way, Dumbledore is gay, guys, instead of doing that, if she said, like, you know, I didn't include enough LGBT, like, or, like, I didn't include any characters that are LGBT, or even if she truly did want Dumbledore to be gay, she could have said, you know, like, I wanted him to be a gay man, but I was scared to release a movie or books in that time with a gay character, and, like, that, like, if she just came out and said that, that would have meant more than just retroactively trying to make this story, like, change the story.
Exactly, because, you know, I feel like, again, like, she and others, this was written in the 90s, okay? This is a very different time back then, and people weren't really writing characters who were gay or transgender or bi or anything like that. So I feel like, again, it would have been understandable if she had just accepted it. I agree with you. Rather than trying to quickly cover her steps up, you know, and try to change the narrative afterwards.
Yeah, and rather than trying to be the one inclusive author back then. I mean, of course, I'm sure there was, like, authors that were less popular that were inclusive of people like that, of, like, just like, diverse backgrounds. But I think that, yeah, it just really comes off as, like, I guess the word would be, like, fake woke, and just trying to be like, oh yeah, like, I'm inclusive, and it's like, okay, no, like, that's not how it works. It's not helpful. And I think it's been, like, there's been a whole to-do about it. I feel like it's really been not blown out of proportions, but I think there's been, like, a lot of talk about it. But yeah, I really do understand where people are coming from, because it does feel very artificial, and it
It
feels
does.
like at that point, like, who is really benefiting from that? Is it gay people that are benefiting from your character that you just now say is gay, that nobody associates with being gay and that
Right.
doesn't affect them at all? Or is it you that's benefiting because you're seen as inclusive now?
Right.
So it comes off as selfish, whereas inclusivity has nothing to do with the self. It has everything to do with including others who don't get the representation they need.
Right. And
So it defeats the purpose.
yeah, and along with that, like there have been some controversial tweets apparently that she's come out with lately
Yes.
in regards to like transgender and stuff like that. And I don't know, I don't have a Twitter. I've never seen the tweets myself, but I do know that people are upset about that.
Yeah, I've heard the same thing. I honestly didn't really like. I feel the same way. Like, I didn't really like see the tweets themselves. I heard that she was tweeting like negative things about transgender people or transphobic things. And that's just not a good look, you know? It's like, I know that people, like, some people say, like, oh, people are offended too easily, but it's like, if she said something that many people were hurt by, I hope she at least apologized from it or about it and, like, tried to move on and be better going forward. Because, you know, we all make mistakes and we all say things that we're like, oh, that came out wrong, or, like, I was being ignorant, whatever it might be. So I hope she at least, like, genuinely apologized about it. I can't really, like, comment on the situation like from an informed position because I don't know what she truly said.
Right.
But yeah, again, that's not a good look paired with the fact that she's like trying to basically, if we're being honest, like profit off of making a gay character.
Yeah.
So that being like that's just what that is to me is disrespect for LGBT community. And then paired with transphobic tweets, it's like, okay, that's not a good look. This is not painting a good picture for you.
Right.
So we definitely wanted to mention that just because
that is
we
problematic.
love Harry Potter, but yeah, nobody's, again, just as Harry Potter has taught us, nobody's perfect, and even the author herself is not perfect and has made mistakes, especially recently, that we really wanted to address.
Yeah, but, you know, going off, like, again, like, we don't want to say she's a bad person, we don't think that at all. Again, there's no black and white, so we did just want to mention, you know, like, she is the only author that ever made the Forbes list, and she actually did lose her spot by giving money to charity. In 2012, Forbes estimated Rowling to be worth about $1 billion, with most of her money coming in from the Harry Potter book series as well as the film franchise. And she actually fell off the Forbes list a year later after donating an estimated $160 million to various charities. So again, you know, she has done good stuff. So it's not like she's a terrible. Yeah,
I had no idea. Like you told me that she was the first author to make the Forbes list and then the first to also she like that's kind of crazy to think about. Like she fell off the Forbes list because she gave so much money away. Like that's again, like you can't hate on that, and that's just a good point that like nobody's one thing. She's not like a horrible person. We don't know how she feels inside, you know. I think she does probably have good intentions. I don't know though. You can never know someone's intentions. You can only know their behaviors.
Exactly.
So her behaviors kind of paint like a an inconsistent pattern. Yes. So we kind of just have to take each thing for what it is, and yeah, we wanted to mention that.
Yeah. But like he said, you know, like we still do very much love the Harry Potter series. I think it's a very good educational story, you know, not only for entertainment, but it has a lot of deeper meanings in there and a lot of messages, and I think that's why so many people love it. You know, I still very much love it, and I enjoy watching it, again, not only for entertainment, but because there are so many deeper things involved with that, you know?
Yeah, I think that definitely as an adult, kind of like what you mentioned with the Potterless series or the podcast, coming from like an adult's like first perspective at Harry Potter, like an adult who is new to Harry Potter, that perspective. For me, I feel like from the start I was like, oh yeah, there's like a lot of social issues being addressed here, and like I love that. That's like what I care about, you know, like I feel like there's a lot of like racial issues addressed, but again, it's more in a roundabout way where it's like, oh, like the Mudbloods versus the pure bloods or whatever,
rather and like Death Eaters and Voldemort's followers.
Exactly.
Stuff like that.
Yeah, rather than just like blatantly giving more airtime to people of color, which would have been better.
Yes, but again, like hopefully they will make a TV series soon. I would be super down to watch that. I would be so excited.
Same.
But yeah, but that is it for this podcast episode, you guys. Thank you so much for listening. Again, if you want to find our sources and links, you can look on our show notes on the website. Again, follow us on Instagram at Dark Matter Pod. And then our website name is darkmatterpod.com. So we'll see you guys next time. Thanks for listening.
Bye.